Brilliant. Okay, well, again, Salam alaikum and hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to this session. I hope you've had a brilliant day so far. It's currently around 6 o'clock in the UK as well. So really appreciate you guys making the time to be here. I'm really looking forward to engaging in this discussion where I kind of wanted to explore some of the complexities that I've faced as a Muslim researcher who's doing kind of insider research. So hopefully some of these concepts and topics might be useful for you all, particularly if you engage in insider research too. By way of introduction, my name is Maisha. I'm the Research Culture Lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Southampton, based in England. I'm also the co-chair of an Office for Students and Research England steering group. So the Office for Students is the regulator of English higher education, and Research England is one of the kind of bodies that come under UK Research and Innovation, which is a non-departmental kind of government body. So that particular steering group oversees this program, which is all about getting racially minoritized students into postgraduate research within the UK. I'm also the co-editor of a recently-ish published book, Uncovering Islamophobia in Higher Education, supporting the success of Muslim students and stuff. So just before I get into this kind of session, I really recognize that obviously some of the discussions are going to be based around things like religion, race, and other protected characteristics, and really recognize that these are sensitive issues to discuss. But I want to, build a brave space with you all and be welcomed into the beautiful learning community that you've already kind of put together. So during this session, and if we have time for kind of Q&A, please don't be worried about, quote unquote, getting it wrong. If you have a thought, perspective, or opinion, as long as you're being respectful in the way that you convey it, we should be good. Self-disclosure is definitely not mandatory, but where some of this content might interact with some of your own lived experiences, please do feel free to share where you're comfortable. And whilst it's not mandatory, I think it is encouraged, because the more that you're able to engage in these topics, the more that you're able to take away as a person within the group. But of course, Chatham House rules can apply. So as said, in the four walls of this virtual Zoom meeting can definitely stay here. And if at any point you do want to stop the recording, especially if we get time for Q&A, please do let myself or Aisha know, and I'm sure that'll be completely fine as well. But I actually wanted to start this, as Aisha mentioned, I kind of wanted to be a bit more engagey and like workshoppy. But I wanted to understand where you guys are kind of coming from towards this topic of insider research and some of the contentions that you might have. So if you're able to use your mobile phone or device, or if you're on a laptop, you can either scan the QR code, or you can go to vvox.app and enter the session ID 131799002. Once you guys are in and have been able to do that, if you can just use a kind of reaction thumbs up emoji just to let me know that you're in, that would be really helpful too. It might not be open, but you might see like a screen. And actually, if I go to the next page, it should register. Okay, I can see there's four people in there as well. And if anyone's having any issues, please do feel free to like unmute. That would be great. I'm only working on one screen, so I don't have proper access to the chat bar.
Someone says, can you put the ID? But the ID is on the screen, so you can see.
Okay, yeah, just at the top there, 131799002. Okay. But we can actually get started. I know there's at least four people in the room, so very happy to kind of get started. And if you're having any issues, there'll be more opportunity to kind of talk. But this is really just to get a sense of where you guys are currently at. So as the poll is open, you can see that the first question is, my research area has a personal relevance to my own or my wider community's experiences. Is that kind of yes, no, or unsure? So feel free to vote. And then once we've got votes in, we can see what everyone said as well. Okay, there we go. I can see there's 5 responses so far. So what are people saying? Yes, actually the majority of people in the room are 80%, doing research that's relevant to either themselves or their kind of wider experience, wider community's experience. Aisha, I can see like there's chat bar going, so if you are able to moderate on my kind of behalf, that'd be so grateful. But we'll go on to the next question, colleagues. So the next question is, my research area has a social justice and or inclusion kind of focus or element. Yes, no, or unsure. Got yes, okay. The majority of you guys, again, doing something that has this kind of equity or inclusion kind of element. It's very similar to myself. Okay. The next question, I've experienced personal contentions or conflict when undertaking my research. And again, on a Likert scale, are you on that kind of strongly agree or strongly disagree kind of spectrum? Okay. See what we have. Hey, a mixed bag, but yes, lots of people in that kind of agree category. So hopefully, yeah, this session will kind of be worthwhile as well. Is there another question? Yes, okay. I think this is the last question. I feel confident in navigating through these research-based difficulties. Again, simple Likert scale, like if you strongly agree or to strongly disagree, or feel neutral about it. Okay, let's see the results. Okay, unsure and that kind of disagree. Okay, inshallah, hoping that this session might be quite worthwhile. And I'd obviously really love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for engaging. And I think that yeah. So before I kind of want to start the session, as I'm fairly new to kind of like MRN, and it's only very recently that alhamdulillah, myself and Aisha have been able to connect, I wanted to give you all kind of career snapshot and give you just a brief insight into Maisha. I won't go into too much depth. All I will say is that I got my start straight following my undergraduate degree at the University of Winchester studying sociology, where I got my start in a kind of research center called the Center for Student Engagement. And within a year of kind of being there, I was actively writing and publishing on Muslim student experience, even though it definitely was not in my job description to do so. But my first paper actually explored how Muslim students experience and understand a sense of belonging on campus. And it really set the basis for what was my first and actually probably most favorite theoretical concept to date, which is called satisfied settling. And I'll explain more about that later. But I was really interested in supporting kind of students of color and Muslim students, not only just within my institution, but on this kind of national level as well. So I applied for like these two sector UKHE kind of sector roles. The first one being the Office for Students' student panel, whereby I was able to be a kind of representative voice, again, strongly advocating for Muslim students and racially minoritized students. And I did a 2-year term of that from 2020 to 2022. And then in 2021, I got that co-chair kind of steering group role that I'd mentioned at the beginning of my kind of presentation. I actually left Winchester in 2023, but my last role there was being a strategic plan project officer. And that was actually quite cool because it got to see me kind of be a part of what Winchester as a university wanted to be, within its kind of like 5-year plan moving forward from like 2023 to 2028, I think it was. But I left to pursue a role at the University of Southampton, which I mentioned at the beginning. And a lot of my role is to support students access, but also their experiences of doctoral study from this kind of ED&I lens once they are with us at the University of Southampton. So really focusing on that PhD or what we call kind of like PGR, postgraduate research landscape. Alhamdulillah, I actually completed my doctorate in October of last year, 2024. I passed with no corrections. That's the only thing I ever brag about with completing my doctorate. And yeah, alhamdulillah, I published my first co-edited collection in December as well. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a snippet about myself as a researcher in the space. Um, So I'd mentioned getting my start at the University of Winchester Center for Student Engagement, and I then became like introduced to what is student engagement theory and practice. And there was a lot of literature that spoke about things like student voice and student representation and student staff partnership and particularly sense of belonging. I feel like it's been a buzzword in higher education for almost like a decade or probably more than that. But the idea of sense of belonging is that it's linked very heavily to student retention and student success. So the basic premise is if a student feels like they belong to their university, their campus, they're more likely to stay there, and they're more likely to, attain a better grade. However, when I was reading all of this kind of research at the time, there was really nothing that spoke to my experiences as a Muslim female student that was based in a predominantly white institution as Winchester. And I really wanted to ascertain, like, do other Muslim students feel like this, feel like me, have this very weird relationship to this concept of belonging? And what I found was is when I started to do this research and interview Muslim students and talk to them, that often Muslim students would say that they did feel a sense of belonging to their university, but they would then follow this up with like a massive but. Yeah, I do feel like I belong here, but there's no halal food, but there's the prayer room isn't great, but I don't see people that look like me, but my lecturers are X, Y, and Z. And then I then began to theorize and test this concept, which is satisfied settling. And I essentially, again, the definition's kind of on the screen there, but posited that Muslim students often settle for a less than university experience unconsciously, more often than not, in relation to their religious needs. And I think the two quotes on the screen there really exemplify that. So the quote in the kind of like red box is basically, a student asking someone, why wasn't there halal food at the canteen, in the university canteen? But actually then justifying that choice by saying, well, there's not that many of us, like not that many Muslim students, so I suppose that's fair enough. And then in the purple box, we've got a student who, we spoke about, having these like really dingy, literally under the under the stairs type level, Harry Potter-esque prayer rooms. And then they were justifying that by saying, well, at least they've given us one, and at least they've given us like wudu facilities, rather than it like, and almost justifying and making excuses for the institution for not providing better, just the very bare minimum, right? And I wanted to set out why this is, why are we doing this as Muslim students? So as I mentioned, I collectively within this research had interviewed approximately 40 Muslim students across 3 different universities. And essentially, this is what I found. So I know this looks like overload, but essentially I want to describe this staged process of satisfied settling. Muslim students do not come to university with this settling kind of mindset. So actually, what I've kind of theorized is it starts that Muslim students, like most Muslims, depending on obviously your location, recognize that they belong to a minoritized groups, to a minority society at large caters to the majoritarian kind of groups, right? So this is in a UK context, but their own experiences prior to coming to university were again pretty poor. So in the UK, we have A levels and GCSEs, which students typically take when they come prior to university at ages like 16 and 18. And actually, they didn't have halal food in the school cafeteria. And when they sat their exams and it coincided with the fasting month of Ramadan, they were not given any kind of either provisions or accommodations. They were fully well expected to just sit there, these really important exams, whilst, having a whole day of not eating, not drinking, and probably, sleep deprived. So when they come into university, there's this expectation down management. You already come in with these low expectations because you're so used to not being considered in that way before. And so what this leads to is self-accommodative behaviors. Instead of raising these as issues, instead of feeling empowered to do so, you are just more likely to take on board self-accommodative behavior. So I've heard multiple Muslim students saying that they would pray in university library corners, in empty classrooms, sometimes in hallways, rather than kind of raise the need of like there needs to be better provision for this, right? And why is this? Why are we not kind of raising these kinds of issues that are impacting our student experience? well, there's just this awareness of an Islamophobic climate that we always occupy, that anything that you say has the potential for your intentions to be misconstrued. So keeping your head down is genuinely the safest option. And again, like these kinds of self accommodative behaviors kind of seep in. I'm only here for 3 years, X, Y, and Z. And that leads to this satisfied settling, right? This thing of just being grateful with what you are given. And actually what this also creates is barriers to Muslim students being able to use their student voice and the ability for us to improve Muslim students' experience whilst at university. So whilst I'm really kind of proud of that kind of research, alhamdulillah, and the ability to kind of engage with Muslim students across, the UK, I did encounter some kind of like unforeseen challenges as a Muslim researcher, and I ended up writing about these contentions in the International Journal of Social Research Methodology because of these ethical, methodological, and personal issues that I encountered, which then had me self-questioning the validity of what I had produced as a researcher. So you can scan the QR code and it'll take you directly to that paper that I had published. But actually what I want to do here is kind of give an overview of the themes that I explored. So the first kind of contention was I was thinking, to what extent had I just overrepresented my own point of view as opposed to being representative of Muslim students. So that theorization of satisfied settling, it came about through if we're talking in like kind of coding terms, it was like latent analysis. Like no one was actually saying that they were settling or felt like they had settled. They were using like these, I do feel belonging, but. And as a researcher, it was semantic analysis rather than the explicit labeling that I kind of picked up on. But again, I considered, how much did I just see myself in that concept? Was it simply myself who just settled for less in my undergraduate student experience? And therefore, was this concept just a sheer over projection of my opinions, right? The second contention kind of leads into that as well. Like I had considered, like, did I inappropriately use my Muslim identity? Did I tacitly kind of coerce Muslim students to take part in my research, despite my research having what I think is an ethical underpinning, wanting to bring to light minoritized Muslim students, views of student experience and sense of belonging? Does that still make it okay to ask a participant by saying, when I was trying to get them to do an interview by saying, oh, come on, you'd really be helping a sister out by taking part in like this 45-minute conversation. And actually that, was that subtly persuading them through my Muslim identity, appealing to their kind of sense of ummah, the fact that we come from like this global Muslim kind of collective. And even, I didn't situate myself inside the prayer room, but I situated myself outside of a prayer room to catch, sisters as they were kind of leaving, or brothers. And actually, is that okay? Like a prayer room isn't, it shouldn't be a site of recruitment unless that's what your research is looking at. But definitely, I was thinking actually that actually a prayer space isn't a space to get like kind of data collection or get students, when students simply are just using that to kind of pray. So again, was feeling like I was inappropriately using my identity in some way, and inappropriately playing on emotion, and did that place limits on participants' agency to withdraw or even feel like an increased sense of responsibility to take part, and was that kind of misuse of my kind of Muslimness, in a sense. So all of this also led to these personal contentions that took place, which is again was really unexpected when I was going into the field. Students would often use Arabic phrases at times because, again, like seeing me as a Muslim, and sometimes I just wouldn't know the meanings of those Arabic phrases. Again, like I'm British Bangladeshi and I can read Quran, but it's not a fluent Arabic, and there it kind of led to sometimes a detachment from my own religion. And therefore, I started questioning, what authority do I have to actually speak on behalf of Muslim students, when actually so many of these students had made me feel like they were quote unquote more religious than I was. So when I was telling students, would you ever ask your university to provide you provisions or accommodations for sitting exams during Ramadan? One student very clearly said, well, no, actually what I'm doing is a struggle, and Allah will reward my struggle by, doing my exams whilst fasting, And then I thought, gosh, this sister's like, she doesn't even this isn't phasing her, and I'm the one who's advocating for like these provisions. Maybe they don't even want it in some sort of level. And I also encountered some sort of like intersectional difficulties being a Muslim woman. I encountered a brother who was quite conservative in his kind of religious outlook, and I'd asked the question around, does your university provide you with a Muslim chaplain? And I explained what a Muslim chaplain was. I said it's kind of like an imam in that they can provide religious guidance to university students, but actually they can be, a man or a woman. And he'd completely like conflated what I'd said and asked me, so do you think a woman can be an imam? Do you think a transgender person could be an imam? And I was just so taken aback by that line of questioning that I, had to threaten to terminate the interview because it felt like he was trying to dominate in that kind of setting when all I was asking about was, do you have a Muslim chaplain, and simply trying to explain the concept. And actually, I still feel like that was the worst kind of experience I had whilst in the field, like in a university that wasn't my own, in unfamiliar territory. But again, increased this sense of detachment, and I felt very juxtaposed between, what I would think is more kind of liberal kind of outlook than a kind of conservative one as well. And actually, I just kind of wanted to pause here because I thank you so much for sharing, colleagues, and I hope like there's some chat in the chat bar. But what I'll do, just being mindful on time, and so we can finish at 7, is actually just to say that uh, having the space to fully acknowledge these is a double-edged sword. I think when you surface these tensions and discomfort, both within a personal and professional capacity, like it's never nice. It's not a nice thing to kind of work through. But actually, what it does allow for is the reconciliation of these very complex feelings that you have. So here's how I kind of worked through each of the 3 tensions that I'd had just kind of presented. So the first one, which was like, was I just simply over projecting my own experiences? Well, actually, I'm a qualitative researcher. Qualitative research denounces the possibility of value-free knowledge. There is no such thing as being objective. And again, like these claims of like objectivity have been debunked by feminists, by critical race theorists as well. And where I align quite closely to Black feminist theory and critical race theory, they both have methodological frameworks that advocate researchers to use their lived experience, right? Often the problems that feminists and critical race theorists seek to answer is this blend of intellectual questioning in addition to personal trouble, right? So therefore, exploring issues that are close to you, that there really doesn't have to be anything problematic with that. And it links in again to the next kind of how I reconciled with this kind of, did I inappropriately use my identity for accessing participants? Well, actually, so many of the Muslim students I encountered really appreciated seeing the representation of a Muslim researcher, and others, in the kind of research that I've kind of cited to there. There are benefits of insider research. That additional kind of insight is appreciated by participants. I loved that students were comfortable to say assalamu alaikum, and use Arabic phrases and feel like totally unfiltered, and so many of those students not only showed an interest in the research itself, but also me, so many of them shook my hands afterwards and had said, thank you, because no one's asked me about my experience as a Muslim here before. And within my kind of field notes when I was doing this research, I kind of written this quote down when I explained this concept of satisfied settling to each of these participants. And one person said, I think you really opened my mind to a different way of looking at this, my experience as a Muslim student. And I honestly think this concept of satisfied settling is excellent. It's a really interesting idea because I think it applies to a lot of people. So to have been that kind of like light bulb moment for some of these Muslim students, again, like that is a way of kind of reconciling with that kind of tension of potential inappropriate access. But really, it also made me more mindful of like always checking in with consent, and and reassuring participants that you always have the right to withdraw your data up until the point of analysis, really. And then the last one of like, this kind of, did I have this insider authority to conduct this research related to my community? I did really feel like my identity as a Muslim was kind of tested, and it felt really challenged. But actually, I learned to absolve myself from this burden of, and I'm sure many of you have had this, like being the Muslim ambassador and wearing that kind of badge. And sometimes that's fine. Like I'm very happy to be the voice, but I don't have to be the only voice. Religion and everything is just, it's not, we're not monolithic, are we? And identity and insider research is all the more kind of complex. So instead of seeing myself as a total insider, I just reconciled with the fact that I'm a partial insider, and that gives you the authority to do this kind of research, or more kind of legitimate that claim if you were to do that. But then it just kind of accepts the limitations of fully resonating with your participants. You're never going to get someone sitting across from you that mirrors every part of you like for like. So yeah, again, kind of realizing that was a nice way to kind of absolve myself of that last tension that I talked about. So just to kind of conclude the kind of workshop, guys, and thank you so much for your engagement. I really hope that the sessions really kind of demonstrated that insider research just proposes these issues for the research itself, but also you as a researcher. But in examining our kind of positionalities and the practices that we're doing, that that makes you more cognizant of their potential effects throughout the research process. As again, I said, I aligned to kind of a qualitative research epistemology. So that really does encourage researchers to be reflexive. Like all of what we've done here is us being reflexive, right? This exercise of then confronting these issues is just is so worthwhile. It's so needed. But actually, this awareness of self also allows for your research practice to be improved. But on a kind of personal level, I found it really kind of healing and therapeutic that even though I wasn't able to have this conversation with a fellow Muslim researcher, having that conversation with myself did feel, again, like quite therapeutic. And finally, I just wanted to end up this kind of quote that the integrity of the researcher, his or her knowledge, experience, honesty, and fairness, that's ultimately the decisive factor of what makes research integrity. So again, like the fact that that experience, the way in which I was approaching the research, my values as a researcher, that's what is a kind of the biggest make or break, I think, in ethics when we talk about research as well. So that's everything for me. That means we've got like 10 minutes for like conversations and questions. I'm so glad of how this all panned out. But thank you so much for listening. And yeah, really, really happy to hear any thoughts or questions as well.